Well, hello there. Great to see you again. Glad you could stop by. I know it's probably late, but I think we need to keep going so you can hear the story. We gotta reach the end at some point. Anyways, before we start, let me get some tea. Been feeling a little parched. Vincent!
Yeah, boss?
Vincent!
Hang on. Coming. I gotta make sure I get those posts up on Instagram. Yay. Okay, yeah, what is it, boss? What do you need today?
Hi, Vincent. Can you do me a favor? Can you get me some tea, please? Thank you. Okay, so, to get into the story, because I know we left it at a critical point. What was it? Oh, yes. Baldwin was getting a bit anxious at the back of the barn. Elrin grabs for Baldwin's arm, mouthing no.
Baldwin!
But Baldwin is transfixed on the boy. With Byron on his lips, and without thinking, he is pulling the door open while sounds of rage escape. The two elves whirl at the noise as Baldwin begins to enter, and immediately his senses are assaulted as the smell of blood fills his nostrils, and a low rumbling echoes in his ear as 3 5-foot-high lizards step out of the stable darkness. Focusing on the boy tied to the pole, Baldwin walks with purpose, ignoring the creatures to either side.
Baldwin! Baldwin!
But it's to no avail. Baldwin is somewhere else and continues towards the boy, to save him, to save Byron. During that time, Tana and Elrin flash to either side of Baldwin, Elrin slashing at the neck of one creature with his longsword, while Tana slides under the other, using the momentum to carry her and the two dirks across the lizard's underbelly. Meanwhile, the dark elves smirk wickedly as they draw their own swords and meet together in front of the boy. Saying something that Baldwin cannot comprehend, one of the females beckons him on. At once, Baldwin is transported back onto a field of death, with war raging all around him, back to where every sword swing was followed by a
I will survive this. I will go home to my family.
But Byron is there too, just standing in the middle of the field. Why is he here? Why is he standing among all those dead bodies? Suddenly, 2 elves with heinous looks and blood on their hands step in front of Byron.
No! No, not Byron!
Instinctively, his sword is out and swinging to his right, while twisting his body backwards in the opposite direction, taking him out of the reach of the other blade. The first elf turns herself, sweeping her leg out to trip, but Baldwin lowers his body, bringing his center of gravity low. However, her reach forces him to half-step back to his left, which luckily works in his favor, as he grabs a milk bucket in his left hand. Stabbing out with his right, he forces the elf to step back, while swinging the bucket up to block a blow from the elf on his left. In the microcosm of battle, it is said that those of battle hardness can sense the slowness of time, allowing eyes to perceive and the mind register what you can see. And it is with this skill the farmer called Baldwin uses to assess and react. When the bucket and sword connect, it shatters, pieces of wood flying everywhere, and it is then Baldwin sees a splinter of wood penetrate right below the right eye of the left elf. Sensing a slash coming from the right, he parries it to the left, using the flat of his blade, trying to keep the momentum of its edge from getting too close to him. Then, pushing himself up, his body comes up against the elf, growling her anger. She twists the blade over his, cutting into his left arm. Ignoring the pain, Baldwin slams his head into her face. An audible crunch can be heard as she stumbles back screaming, blood pouring out of her nose, and the blade swinging blindly left and right. Continuing his momentum, Baldwin falls forward, down onto his stomach, and rolls to his right. There is a sound of fabric ripping as the other elf's sword stabs into the barn floor, catching on Baldwin's cloak. Kicking out, he tries to knock the blade out of her hand, but the barn floor is of wood and has got hold of the blade tip. Neither move for a second, and she is abandoning the sword and dropping onto Baldwin with a dagger in her left hand. In a flurry of movements, Baldwin tries to grab for the dagger, but instead finds the blade stabbing through in the center of his hand. Pain escapes his lips, and the elf starts chanting with glee in her eyes. Baldwin tries to twist the blade away from his body, but she will have none of that. Taking her other hand, she grabs the hilt and pushes it down towards Baldwin's heart. It is then that Baldwin sees it, and he smiles. Hesitating for a moment, her eyes query his resolve, but then it hits her. The blinding pain of the splinter into her eye as Baldwin strikes her with his left hand. Screaming, she bends backwards on him, searching for the tool of pain, of blindness, and, knowing there is no reprieve in war, Baldwin uses the blade in his hand to slash the elf's neck while pushing her off. Rolling into a crouch, Baldwin looks for the other elf, but she is back against the wall, away from Byron. No, the boy, Marcus's boy. And Tana and Elrin have their swords pointing at her. Getting up slowly, he sees 2 of the lizards dead, but the third is nowhere to be seen. All the while, the children are crying, and Marcus is trying to console them, though still tied. Besides the horse, cow, and sheep, there is no one else in the barn. No Sylvia, no Byron. Grimacing, Baldwin pulls out the dagger and then tears strips off the dead elf's clothes, bandaging his hand. When done, he picks up the sword, sheathes it, and then walks towards the elf.
Where are they?
Incomprehensible words spill out from the dark elf, as well as from Elrin. Baldwin marches up to her, but she tries to swing the sword. Baldwin, using the dead elf's dagger, easily parries it away.
Where are they? She knows not who we are asking about. This family is the first they have encountered. Or it's done. She is lying. She says they came here looking for the one that killed the Jurgurmal days ago.
At that, Tana looks at Baldwin with concern.
Where's my family?
The dog elf sneers, then spits into his face. Without thinking, the dagger is at her throat, each of them staring into the other's eyes. One blazing with rage of lost love, the other bloodshot with hate towards humans. Seconds pass, and Baldwin spins away, tossing the dagger aside.
Baldwin, she cannot live.
Baldwin turns back, looking at the 3.
She will either try to kill you still, or make her way back to bring more and revenge. And their way is to never let grudges go by without punishment.
Baldwin is angry. This is why he didn't re-enlist with the war group. Too much killing. He had promised himself no more. No more killing.
What would you have me do? Be rid of one more dark elf? Less of their ilk walking freely, especially out above the ground, is never a bad thing.
Shaking his head, Baldwin replies,
No, I am done killing.
Disappointment appears on Elrin's face, and without turning, reaches back and stabs the elf in the chest with his sword. Shock appears on her face, but for a moment, as she gasps one last time before sliding off his blade onto the barn floor.
Really?
Tana begins to speak, her hands gesturing fast, but Elrin motions for her to stop.
Do you forget that they, who we've killed, were looking for you? Perhaps they know not who you are specifically, but what if your wife and child were home? By torture and death, the Dark Ones would have teased out who the Jurgurmal's death was caused by.
Baldwin clenches his fists, frustrated in his inability to make sense of all this. An evil creature, dead a week ago, and just by sheer luck. And more evil, roaming about, and now looking for him. Crying children bring Baldwin back. Quickly he goes to the boy tied to his dead brother and frees him. The young ones run to the father. Tana and Elrin help, releasing Marcus and helping Baldwin lay the eldest son down onto the floor. For the next half hour, Baldwin tries to comfort Marcus as he sobs over his son, and when there are no more tears to shed, the 3 help Marcus and the boys bury the young man behind the barn under an old apple tree. Marcus just stares out at the fresh dirt, asking aloud,
Why?
Baldwin looks to Tana and Elrin. Tana looks sadly back at Baldwin, and then gently pulls the two young boys towards the house.
Marcus, it is late. Let's get the boys back to the house and into bed.
A couple of minutes pass before Marcus looks up, and seeing the boys heading to the house, starts after them. It takes Marcus about a quarter hour to get them to quiet their sadness, offering his bed for sleep. It is not long before the two boys are asleep from fright and exhaustion, but sleep eludes Marcus. Not until an hour before dawn that Baldwin notices Marcus isn't crying anymore and checks in on him. There he is, finally asleep, with each child tucked to either side of him. Walking back to the front room, which is part kitchen, part sitting area, Baldwin looks to Tana and Elrin and asks,
What am I supposed to say?
Tana gestures a question back, asking, Say to who?
To Marcus. What is it you think he will ask?
Baldwin looks back, pointing to the bedroom, then looks out towards the direction of the apple tree and points there.
His death is my fault. How do I even explain that? This I could not answer. Only you and your heart can reply. The pain from tonight's loss will stay for some time, and even when you try, will he even hear the words with understanding, or will his mind be too clouded? And where is Sylvia? And Byron? Baldwin, stop. Take pause. The men and children will be asleep for some time, as you should. Tana and I will go get the horses and the dog and watch all sleep. When you're awake, then we can ask these hard questions again.
A myriad of emotions flood into Baldwin, frustration being the worst. Not knowing where his family is, not understanding the depth of this evil. Why now? And why him? Slowly he heads over to a long bench fitted with seating cushions and lays down. He feels tired, but not from physical exertion, just from emotional turmoil. Closing his eyes, he searches for sleep, but in the darkness of sight, images of Marcus's son tied up appear, along with scenes of the young boys, and instinctively Byron's face appears, then Sylvia's. Tears trickle down Baldwin's face, and moments later they are being wiped away with a gentle voice in his ear saying, Sleep. Sounds of talking slowly penetrate Baldwin's darkness. Trying to ignore them, he mumbles them to go away, but then the smell of venison cooking assails his nose, and his stomach cries out for a reprieve. Opening his eyes, he sees Tana and Elrin over the stove, laying thin strips of deer in a pan, and on the table there is a small pile of cooked meat on a plate. Sitting up, he continues looking around as he hears other noises, then notices Marcus and the boys sitting on the front porch steps. Marcus is in the middle, and they seem to be in deep conversation. Baldwin stretches as he stands up, his shoulder and back sore from being in one position all night. Just then, Jasper scampers out from under the table and looks up at Baldwin, tilting his head.
Hey there, boy. Are you hungry? Don't let him fool you. He ate some decent scraps earlier. Where did this come from? There were two, not far from the horses, when we went to get them. So, Tana took aim. Now, we have some meat for the trails ahead, and we do not take away from what little Marcus has. So, how is he? Did he ask you anything? No. The children were at first a little before midday, and then a short time thereafter the father awoke. He did stop by you as you slept, but said nothing. He has been with the boys ever since.
The sound of footsteps causes both to look towards the front door. There stands Marcus, looking from Baldwin, then to the elves, then back to Baldwin. Not taking his eyes off him, Marcus says,
The boys and I are grateful what you did. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost them too.
Baldwin stares for a moment, not knowing what to say.
We are just happy and that the three of you are okay. But with time, hopefully they, the little ones, will sleep without fear.
One of the boys calls out for Marcus. Turning, He heads back out to them.
Sorry.
Tana gestures. Go and speak with him. There is a brief silence in the room.
And what do I say? How do I explain those dead elves in the barn? Not to mention the giant lizards. After the horses were tended to, I'd buried the two elves. Where? That matters not. What matters is the father moving forward with his two boys that still live. The lizards? Those Tana dragged away with the horses. They should be at a distance that will not disturb the farm, yet perhaps will feed any hungry wolves that will be passing by. Were all three lizards killed? No. As soon as it saw two of its kind die, it ran out through the door we came in. I would think it is heading back to the depths of the upper plateau. So, then more of those creatures and the dark elves are going to return? Perhaps, though it is by itself and it is many days from home. And there is the forbidden forest it goes through. So, maybe it gets eaten before then. So, I'm praying that an oversized lizard will get killed and eaten by something even bigger.
Tana and Elrin both nod, and, in a low voice, Elrin says,
There are such creatures in those woods.
Shaking his head in disbelief, Baldwin heads towards the door. He needs to talk to Marcus. What to say is beyond him. As he steps out onto the porch, Marcus turns and then stands to step down, motioning to the boys to stay. Without a word, both men walk a distance from the steps so young ears can't hear.
I'm sorry, Marcus.
Sorry for what?
For last night.
Baldwin, if it wasn't for you and your friends, well, the sunrise probably would have looked a little different coming up on this farm.
I know, but...
And how is it that you're alive? When Sylvia came for us days ago telling of Jacob's dog and all, and then us finding his body all messed up, and all that blood, well, we could only assume a bear had taken you back to its den.
Well, that wasn't a bear.
Okay, then what was it? There wasn't any dead animal left, unless some wolves, of course, dragged it off.
It was... a creature.
A creature, like one of those black, slinky cats with those long claws Billy Bob said he saw when hunting west of the Smith's farm?
No, Marcus. This creature was larger. It was much larger. I don't think you would believe me if I tried to describe it. Horston, I don't even believe it myself.
There is a pause between the two as both their gazes drift towards the boys. Sounds of crickets, the cow mooing, and the occasional sheep punctuate the silence. Still looking at his boys, Marcus asks,
Why were those elves here? They killed Junior. And for what? They kept yelling at him. They kept yelling at me. And God knows what they were saying.
Before Baldwin can reply, the boys are up and running past them. Turning to see where they're headed, Marcus and Baldwin see a horse-drawn wagon approaching, and Baldwin recognizes the big draft horse called Brutus, and he is pulling Sylvia and Byron towards him. What? I'm sorry. I know I stop, it seems, at the most inopportune times, but rest assured, I have the mark laid out in the book. I know where I stopped. I have places to be tomorrow, so I must settle in and get to bed. Please come back, and we will get to the next chapter, you and I, and see what happens. Until then, be safe, sleep well.